I still remember the reveal. Apple Intelligence, the new era of how we would use and interface with our Apple devices. It made all the sense in the world. AI models had gotten so much better and smarter, it seemed like we were just days away from being able to run them on our phone with our data and do everything that we need to. The AI ML team at Apple was cooking. They had so much cool stuff they wanted to share with us. And then it just didn't happen. It's been kind of crazy to watch. The only time I've seen Apple flop like this in the past was with AirPower, and they basically scrubbed the history of that project out of existence because of how hard it failed. But this isn't a fancy wireless charger. This is a core piece of Apple's business plan. It just failed. The AI/ML team internally is referred to as aimless because it's a funny pun, but also it's how they feel. It seems like Apple just got off on the wrong foot and kept sprinting with a broken ankle. And now what we have is nonsense. How is this the same company that invented the modern smartphone and they can't figure out how to get us to use these new AI things? How are small startups able to trounce what Apple is capable of? Why are they looking to buy out a search engine like Perplexity? What's going on here? Apple's a different company than it used to be, but it's also the same one. And I want to make the argument about why the Apple we know and love was never equipped to win in the AI space, even if they should have been the best equipped of anyone else. As much as I love Apple, and you guys love to give me crap for my biases here, they don't pay me anything. In fact, Apple costs me quite a lot of money. I just had to get my iPhone swapped recently. So knowing that, someone's got to cover the bills. So quick word from today's sponsor before we break down everything that led to Apple's failures to figure out AI. There are two things that are hard in software development: naming things, caching, and off-by-one errors. Okay, jokes aside, there are two things I've found to be way harder than most of the things we meme about. Those are auth and setting up payments correctly. I've been to hell and back with both of these. They're misleadingly easy to do initially, but they are incredibly hard to get right, especially as you start to scale up. You'll find holes in everything, unless you use somebody that actually knows how to handle those things for you. And today's sponsor does. Clerk makes building your everything platform for your users significantly easier, and not just making the sign-in button work properly. It integrates deeply into your app. They have the nice fancy one-click drop-down for the user to see all the information about themselves. All the user stuff that you normally have to build a team for is handled, but what's much cooler is the new Clerk billing product. If this had existed when I built T3 Chat, my life would have been so much easier. We spent days getting the Stripe set up correctly. Now it's literally just 2 clicks. Like, what? And it makes a ton of sense when you think about it. The status of someone's subscription, it shouldn't be a field you're managing in a database somewhere and hoping the webhook comes through correctly. It's just part of the user object. If the user is doing something, the user object itself should be the thing that tells you if the user subscribed or not. It makes all of the sense in the world, and it's really cool to see this type of integration. You define a plan type, and then you can use it wherever you need to. If you want to wrap a feature, you can wrap it, name the feature, and now it's protected if the user does or doesn't have access. And if you're using a backend function or just a server rendered page, you can get has from auth and then check if it has specific plans. And now you know everything you need to know in order to do the right thing for the user or block them if they haven't paid yet. They built on top of Stripe, but they're not charging much on top of it. You have to pay the normal Stripe fees, but then it's just 0.7% on top. That's nothing, especially considering the amount of time I've spent setting this all up. I would have traded that time for that percentage any day. I really wish this existed when I got started. I'm thankful that you can use it now. Check them out today at soydev.link/Clerk. So why exactly does Apple suck so hard at AI? This is a question that has a lot of nuance and layers to it. I am excited to break those down, but we do have to agree on a couple core things that a lot of you Apple haters aren't going to agree on. And that's fine. It's going to make most of this video useless to you because you're bad at taking perspectives that aren't your own. But I would encourage you to do your best to ignore your existing perspective and assume mine for the next 20 to 30 minutes or however long this video is in order to actually understand how this happened. Even if you don't agree with the premises I'm about to state, I think it will help you understand how we ended up where we are today. There are a couple core things that define Apple. Best-in-class hardware. And what this means is no compromises. When Apple put out the iPhone, every other touchscreen device was a reflexive touchscreen, which meant that it had a plastic layer and a capacitor underneath. And when those two touched, that would trigger the touch. That felt awful. Capacitive touch was just starting to happen. It was comically more expensive, but it meant you could do a much smoother use of the touchscreen. Like you could actually use your fingers instead of a stylus. It meant multi-touch was a thing. It enabled so much. It was way more expensive for just a touchscreen, but the result was way better. Apple is not the type of company to cut corners here. I know this as an audiophile because Apple's devices are still the only ones that consistently have good digital to analog converters built in. So when you plug in headphones, even with the little like USB-C or Lightning to 3.5 jack adapter, it sounds way better than most alternatives. In the audiophile world, Apple's little $10 USB-C to headphone jack is the recommended starting point for better quality audio. It's better than the $1,000 motherboard's headphone jack that you bought on your crazy gaming PC, I promise you. Apple doesn't cut corners the way almost every other brand does. That's just how they work. This should actually be one of their benefits, which we'll get to in a bit. So we need to accept that Apple doesn't compromise on the quality of their hardware. You can shit on them for this. You can like them for this. You can doubt that this is true. You're wrong. They put a lot of effort into best-in-class stuff. I hate that I have to keep qualifying this, but I'm going to because I hate you people that shit on this so much. AnandTech was one of the greatest sources of tech everything back in the day. I would check this site literally every single day from when I was like 13 till I was like 25, just seeing what was going on in computer and mobile and just tech hardware. It was so fun. I learned so much from these guys. It's insane. Anand Lashempi was the guy who ran AnandTech. Absolute legend. One of the most capable people in the world of hardware. He did a write-up breaking down how the Apple 64-bit phone processor worked in the iPhone 5S and ended up doing such a good deep dive on that he ended up being hired off of his own site by Apple to help run a bunch of stuff internally for chips and Apple Silicon stuff. He's a huge piece of that crazy puzzle that enabled both like the MacBook 12-inch, that crazy Mac that was using an Intel processor with no fan, that was super thin, the first ever consumer USB-C device. Still crazy. Talk all the shit you want. Apple literally invented the USB-C standard alongside some others and brought it to the US before anyone else. And Anand Lashempi was one of the architects at Apple who made it so you could put an SSD bigger than 128 gigs on that laptop. Dude is a god. One of the most talented silicon engineers and like chipset architecture people ever. And he got there because he was poached after writing up the best breakdown of how Apple's processors worked by third parties separately reverse engineering it and figuring out how it worked. If you don't know any of these things, if you don't know the history of Anand Lashempi or Apple Silicon or how they deeply innovated in this space, and you're talking shit about Batterygate, I hope you understand how woefully uninformed and problematic your things are. Like, your perspective is so diluted that you can't be part of this conversation. And that sucks because it's an interesting conversation, but your hatred of Apple is blinding you. Throw that out for a bit because I want to shit on Apple with you guys. This is an opportunity for us to agree that Apple's doing something wrong. But if you can't see what they did right, you won't understand what they're doing wrong. I'm trying to help you, Mr. Apple hater. I see you on the other side in your parents' basement. Listen to me for just a little bit of time so you can have better ways to shit on this company that I like and you hate. Anyways, best-in-class hardware, not disputed. Apple's options for things might be overpriced, but it is the highest quality option. They don't cheap out on parts. They don't cheap out on DACs. They don't cheap out on screens. They don't find some way to cut a corner and save a bit of money. That's not their thing. They'd rather go to court with Qualcomm for 10 years than compromise on the quality of their modems. It sucks, but this is also what makes Apple stuff good. There have been exceptions to this. Like they sold the Fatbook Pro, the MacBook 13-inch that had the CD disk drive for way too long. They've kind of stopped doing that, but there was an era where that was really bad. Okay, best-in-class hardware. If you don't agree, I can't change your mind. Whatever. Next key Appleism. Late is better than wrong. Generally speaking, Apple isn't the first to a thing. They were not the first to laptops. They were not the first to GUIs. They kind of stole them, arguably. They were certainly not first to the smartphone. And they did not plan to be first to AI. They aren't. They know better. Apple waits until the thing is roughly established and there are patterns and benefits and negatives and all these pieces so they can come in and do it right. They were really late to OLED screens, but when they came in, they did a great job. They were really late to tablets, but now the iPad's the only tablet people care about. They've been really late to so many different things, but when they show up, they either win or they end up near the top. Exceptions being things that don't end up having a winner because the whole field sucks, like Vision Pro is such a massive upgrade from every other VR headset ever, and I own most of them. I'm a lunatic about these things. The gap from my Valve Index to my Vision Pro feels bigger than the gap from my BlackBerry to my iPhone. Yet it didn't do enough because VR itself isn't a viable space. So they are okay with being late because they want to show up with quality. And either they win a huge portion of the market or the market itself is fucked. It's almost always one of the two. What's crazy is that stopped being the case, which is why this all starts to get interesting. Late is better than wrong. Next key point. Charge users money, not privacy. A lot of other companies that Apple competes with have a less clear exchange. With Apple, I give you money for your phone, you give me the phone, and now I use the phone. If I want to use Apple services, like I want to pay for Apple Music or iCloud or these different things, I pay Apple money for those and I get a specific service. They don't do very generous free tiers for almost anything. This does have its negatives, like they put ads in settings for their services. I hate that so much. It still feels weird and not very Apple-y. But they don't sell your data in order to make money off of you as an individual. Almost every other company has some exchange like that, where they are selling your attention, they're selling your data, they're selling something that isn't just charging you money. Even when they take their effective hostage fees, the 30% cut that I absolutely hate, as you've seen in a bunch of my videos, that is a cash exchange. You as a user want to buy apps on Apple's App Store because you have an Apple device. So the apps cost 30% more, or the company makes 30% less in order for you to do that. They are charging you money instead of using the data they collect from you doing that to go sell that to advertisers and other brands and businesses. Apple has chosen to make their exchange a clear monetary one for almost everything that they do. They don't give out things. Apple doesn't do free. They do immediate cash exchanges. Except for one particular thing. Loyalty is really essential to the way Apple builds. They will do things that on the outside seem user hostile to protect users at a level of depth that most of us, especially as tech people, just aren't capable of thinking of. Talk all the shit you want about them staying on Lightning. Lightning was not making them much money by the time that they deprecated it. The reason that they moved to USB-C was because they wanted to. They had to accelerate the timeline, though, because of the EU mandate. Apple didn't take their time to make a bunch of money on it. They took their time because my mom is pissed that she has to change chargers again. Didn't I just change chargers? Yeah, like 12 years ago, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that, but it's reality. Most people, not most people who watch this video, but most people in general didn't want to change chargers again because they don't benefit from USB-C because they're just all on Apple devices. As more Apple stuff started moving to USB-C, it made a lot of sense. And for me as a professional that uses the USB-C port on my phone to record video to an external SSD, it's essential. I needed the USB-C phone like 5 years ago, and I'm really happy to have it. My desire to have it is different from the average Apple consumer. And Apple obsessively studies these users and what they want. They are constantly doing surveys, constantly tracking sales and all of these things. They know when the users don't want a thing. And they will do their best to delay it for as long as they can. They will fight to every end they can to keep users loyal. And this has its negative consequences too. Stuff like my favorite thing to cite, Batterygate. If you're not familiar with the context of Batterygate, the quick TLDR is that with the iPhone 6, they used a new battery manufacturer because the phone was bigger and they wanted to stick more battery in. The problem with that was that the new battery manufacturer kind of lied about what temperature ranges the battery worked in. So if you were in really cold environments a lot or really hot environments a lot, the battery's quality would degrade faster. And when the battery quality degraded, it wasn't just your phone would die faster, it wouldn't be able to go from low wattage to high wattage as fast as it needed to. So if your phone was running at like 0.5 watts and idle, and you open up the home screen and you click an app, the processor is going to need a lot more power for like 50 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds in order to open the app and load it into RAM. So you're going to suddenly go from like 5% CPU usage to 100%. You're going to go from 0.5 watts to 10 watts for a little bit, and then it goes back down. But when your battery's degraded, its ability to go from 0.5 watts to 10 watts in a short amount of time, it's kind of just gone. And that resulted in a problem where degraded batteries, when opening apps on your phone, would just crash the phone because it couldn't get enough power, so it would just shut down. And that's a terrible experience, opening an app on your phone and having your phone shut off. Apple has enough users and enough like general crash analytics to notice the trend And they put out an iOS update where if your battery was degraded, they would reduce the speed that your phone would ramp up its CPU. So they didn't change how fast your phone can go. They changed how fast it can get to its top speed. They didn't change it so it can't go 100 miles per hour. They changed the 0 to 100 speed. So the speed that you get there at is different, not the max speed you can go. And they did that to protect the user experience on these old phones with bad batteries. And this got framed by dishonest people as Apple intentionally slowing down your phone, planned obsolescence. We want to make your phone way worse so that you have to go buy a new one. No, they didn't. They didn't change the velocity, they changed the acceleration. If they wanted to do that, they would have capped the max speed of your phone. They wouldn't have changed how fast it gets there. There was a very obvious reason they did this. But you're going to go cite the court case and say that I'm wrong because Apple settled a bullshit small claims court that was a relatively cheap expense rather than continuing to fight it. It is what it is. I don't care. Everybody who says Batterygate's proof that Apple has planned obsolescence and hates their users is so bad faith they probably already stopped watching the video so they could rage in my comment section. Scroll down if you want to see them. They're a fun spectacle. So Apple does these types of things that get them crap because they want to make sure that the user experience is as good and stays as good as possible. This is also why they've been sketchy on right to repair stuff, because they don't want people to go to a random repair shop, get a crappy, cheap knockoff screen, and then have a bad experience on their iPhone. And I can tell you from my own experience, remembering the days in the iPhone 4, 4S to 5S, those knockoff screens were terrible. And I had so many friends where like they would show me something on their phone. I'm like, what's wrong with that? It's because they use a knockoff screen. So common. And I get that Apple should be better about these things. I fully agree. Apple needs to really rethink how they do repairability, especially for older devices. But the goal there is to make sure the floor of how bad an Apple device experience can be is way higher than it is for other things, because they don't want any user to have a bad experience with their device. That is just how Apple structures their business. They want to minimize the chance you have a bad experience and maximize the chance you have a good one. These are the core attributes that define Apple in a lot of ways. You could break down and add way more. You could fight on the points here. But I think if we start from this established, agreed starting point, things will make much more sense going forward. So where does this play into Apple's AI strategy? I'm going to start with the best case first. This is one of my favorite charts ever. This is the Geekbench single core scores across various different phones. You can see that the iPhones consistently maintain a pretty solid lead over the highest end Galaxy devices, but that's not the part that I care about here, because Samsung's market penetration is not defined by the Galaxy Ultra series, it's defined by the A series, as well as Motorola with the E phones as well. These phones near the bottom make up the vast majority of Android sales. Apple's phones tend to last longer. So there's a lot more iPhone 12s around nowadays than there probably are Galaxy A51s. Regardless, the gap is so huge that even a brand new, cheap Android phone performs significantly worse than an 8-year-old iPhone. This is an important to note chart. And everybody's saying, what about Pixel? Pixel makes up such a small percentage of the market, it doesn't fucking matter. We're talking about real devices in real users' pockets. I love the Pixel line. I was a Nexus owner for a long time. I rocked every Nexus phone from the Nexus 1 to the Nexus 5. I was an Android fanboy back in the day, and then I turned 18 and grew up. So I understand. I'm with you guys. I love the Nexus line and Pixel line. It's hard for me to not go buy a Pixel Fold right now. I want one so badly. It seems so cool. We're talking about actual market penetration and actual sales. This is about how many people have how much CPU in their pocket. And right now, Apple has an absurd lead in the amount of compute in people's pockets on average. If you look at the number of pockets, the number of people with these phones, and the amount of compute that they have, Apple has this really crazy thing where the sheer amount of compute power people have in their pockets is just insane. Oh, and everybody's saying, but what about Pixel? The most recent Pixels are getting 2/3 the score that the most recent Galaxies are, which is still very low compared to the most recent iPhones. To be fair, this is just single-core CPU testing. I don't have a good way to bench the GPU side, sadly. There's some weird Xiaomi stuff using the Snapdragon 600 series that's, I believe, built for VR headsets, so it's cool seeing that in here. But again, just no presence from Google in this chart at all. They're all the way down below the OnePlus 11. Their GPU performance is garbage. Apple's A18 trounces most Samsung and MediaTek stuff. These Qualcomm Snapdragon 8s, these are their equivalent of the Apple M series. So these are like computer chips. Sadly, I can't filter out M4 because it's technically a mobile chip. You can put it in an iPad. I think that's bullshit, but yeah. 18 Pro is the start of actual mobile chips here. And you can see even like last gen Apple chips, GPU bench, like all around Samsung and other chips. And if we find the Google Tensor, it's literally half the GPU performance of Apple's modern chips. Okay, apparently they're actually stuffing the 8 Elite into phones now. That's hilarious. Yeah, the 8 Elite is the first thing Qualcomm, I think, ever put out that can beat an Android chip. 40% improvement in gaming. Still loses on CPU, but it seems like their GPUs are catching up. If you buy an ROG Republic of Gamers phone, cool. Not real market penetration. I didn't know Samsung was using it because Samsung also uses Zenyo, so you never know what you're getting when you buy one. But there is progress happening here. It's slow and non-deterministic. And I think, hopefully, most of y'all can agree with me that Apple, in general, has a pretty significant lead on GPU perf and CPU perf for most people's devices. If you take an average iPhone owner, someone right in the median, and an average Android phone owner, the iPhone owner, on average, will have between 2 and 10 times more perf in their phone than the Android phone does. If you cap this as like people who spent more than $800 on their phone in the last 2 years, maybe they're a little bit closer. But if we're talking about the market, the averages, the expected experience when I build an app for iPhone versus an app for Android, I can expect much more availability of performance, much more CPU, GPU, all of these things on an iPhone than an Android phone in general. Why am I bringing all of this up? Well, I guess I just want to make my comment section even worse, but the actual reason I'm bringing this up is because of, in particular, that GPU side, how valuable that is for on-device inference. This is going to be one of the biggest differences between Apple and everyone else, especially if we're talking about Google and the Pixel line. Google has invested a lot in CPU architecture and design. They've invested much more so on the server side than they have on the mobile side because they use their chips to run models in crazy server farms and warehouses. They're a big part of why Gemini is as fast and cheap as it is. There's a couple things you need to do inference and AI stuff well. You need fast GPUs or GPU-like chips. Think like the Tensor type stuff, all the crazy things Google's doing for their own chips. You need fast GPUs. You need a good foundation, in quotes, which is like the foundational model, the science, the training, and all of that. And the other big thing you need, a ton of data. This is where things get interesting. I'm going to intentionally leave those 2 points out for now because I want to focus on this. If we were to believe that most AI should run on your device in order to prevent your data from having to be shipped up to a server, wait, and then get it back so that it works offline, so that it works privately, so that it works with lower latency. We do a lot of these types of things. If we really, really want to run things on your device correctly and safely and protecting your privacy, Apple has a massive advantage here because Apple has the performance lead by a lot. If you were to measure the amount of compute that is in the hands of people relative to the brand, I would bet around 50% of the compute that is owned by end users, just like the sheer amount of processing power that is in the hands of and in the possession of individuals, that more than 50% of the world's compute that is consumer is in the hands of Apple. That Apple has, even if they have less than half of phones, they have way more than half of phone compute. And if you argue me on that, you just don't understand the size of these numbers, it's fine. Especially when you consider that Apple owns all of the iPhone market and Google owns like a tenth or less of the Android market. So Apple has a majority hold, a monopoly borderline, on large amounts of compute in the hands of users. That sets them up for a really, really powerful play, which is edge AI. Edge compute being the thing closer to you instead of it being on a dedicated server somewhere else. Apple has such powerful devices in the hands of individuals that they have the opportunity to do something crazy there. If they can get good models that can run on phones, on hardware that is that light, Apple has way better market penetration to do this. And this is the bet that a lot of people, myself included, made when they bet on Apple. And for me, invested in Apple. I had a lot of money in Apple. And as I saw Apple failing with Apple Intelligence and also the tariffs and whatnot, I ended up liquidating most of my Apple position. I ended up with like a 3x return on that. This is not investor advice. I don't take my advice on investment stuff, please. But I tapped out of my Apple investment and I had made a lot of it because I thought they were going to win here. So what went wrong? A couple things. If we all wanted to run models on our phones, Apple would win. They have all of the pieces they need to do that. But since they couldn't establish that lead fast enough, we're starting to see Android devices catching up in some of these spaces. But there are other scarier things happening that make this a lot harder for Apple. We're going to cover why is Google so good at AI? Because Google has come out to be a weirdly powerful leader in the AI space. Google has a couple things that nobody else does. They have really good silicon. Almost everybody else that is training models is using GPUs from NVIDIA. That's why NVIDIA is such an absurdly overvalued company, because they all have to rely on NVIDIA to get the processors, the graphics cards that are used to do this training in order to make the model in the first place, and then also to serve the model to users on the other side. Google trains their models on their own chips. They do inference on their own chips. That allows them to make things that are way more effective and efficient than almost anyone else in the industry. And it's allowed them to make some of the best and most performant models in the world. But having good silicon is not enough. You also need a shitload of data. Google has been collecting data on every one of us for a very long time. Most of you are watching this video on YouTube right now. You think that Google doesn't know an absurd amount of you based on the YouTube videos you watch, when you pause, when you skip, what ads you look at, what ads you don't look at. Google has such an absurd level of data that just puts them really far ahead for training these models. Google's income historically has mostly been from ads. In order to make ads better, they have to have better understanding of users, which they got from data. This huge investment they made into data has set them up really well for success. They also have a cloud platform. The cloud platform is important because they need a lot of compute to handle a lot of these use cases. They don't just have their own silicon, they have their own servers, they have their own platform. They have all of these pieces to distribute the AI to users over the internet. They're not very good at this part. We've seen that with a lot of the weird internet outages they've caused and whatnot, but GCP is a real thing. It's a platform that they own. They also have devices in users' hands. They might not all be Pixels. In fact, a very small percentage of them are, but they have a lot of people that have Android phones. They have a lot of pieces that let them put these devices and put these experiences in front of users. They also have Chrome. They also have the Google Suite. They have all of these ways, software and hardware, to surface these experiences to users. And possibly their biggest advantage, they don't mind shipping slop. Google doesn't care if the thing they ship doesn't work. If it still gets interest, they'll fix it. And if it doesn't get interest, they'll kill it. They don't care. Google has zero desire to keep their brand sacred and well respected. If you don't believe me, take a look at any app built in Flutter, especially the Google apps built in Flutter. Google's bar for quality is it's not a bar, it's a stick they use to hit each other with. It's not a real thing. Google's quality bar is non-existent. This combination of things has set up Google absurdly well to find success in this space. Google was disproportionately advantaged, and even though they showed up late, they showed up quite late to the AI race, especially they were so deep on DeepMind, which was a company they acquired that was mostly doing Google Translate stuff at the time, that when the OpenAI white papers came out about LLMs, they had to reset everything. And it took a while for them to do it, but they succeeded. They have some of the best models in the world and some of the best AI things you can do now. At the same time, they built Stadia, which was a shit show, but this is Google. They do some things hilariously wrong and then other things stumbled upon the right way to do it. And this is one of those cases. So I'm going to add a couple details here. Really good silicon for servers and AI. A shitload of data. Privacy. LOL. A cloud platform. They scale. Kinda. Devices in users' hands. Meh. I don't mind shipping slop. So let's, now that we have these details, go through and see how this compares with Apple. So bad at AI. So really good silicon for servers or AI. Apple has good silicon in your hands, but they don't have good silicon on their servers. They're still probably using AMD processors for their server racks, so most people are using. They don't have the ability to do server-side inference, really. So we lose that point. A shitload of data? We have to delete that one too, because Apple cares so much about privacy that they don't have much data on you or anything really in general. Everything is so encrypted that Apple can't get into your iCloud account unless you hit a specific box in your settings that enables them to do that. And then in certain countries where that's not allowed, they prompt you about it so that you'll help fight the government to allow for more privacy. Apple's been attacked so many times for protecting terrible people like terrorists because they believe in privacy for the end user. I'm on their side there, but they're getting a little bit fucked for that because they don't have the data they need to make Siri better, to make AI models that work, to do better image detection, to do all these types of things because they don't collect data from users. Cloud platform, lol. Devices in users' hands, sure. There's one that they have. And they don't mind shipping slop. They don't mind shipping slop in developer betas, but they do not like shipping slop. So the only thing Apple has going for them is devices in users' hands. They don't have any of the other things they need to be successful in this space. That doesn't mean they won't be. They were successful in smartphones, even though they had none of the pieces they needed to be to do that. So how can Apple be safe? What do they have that helps? They have powerful devices in users' hands. Another big one they have is taste. We could fight on this all we want. Apple cares almost too much. Most of the time Apple's being memed on, it's because they were slightly ahead of the curve. Think about how many people were pissed about the headphone jack being removed. How many devices do you own that still have a headphone jack? Think about how pissed people were about the camera bump on the iPhone. What doesn't have a camera bump now? Think about how pissed people were when they removed the CD drive. Who buys CDs anymore? Apple tends to be a taste definer in a lot of ways, to the point where they cause problems with it. And this can go really far in a world of slop. That said, it has not helped them much yet. There are other things they have that can help them, though. Deep hardware plus software integration. This has been the key thing saving Apple historically. Since they make the iPhone, since they make the processor for the iPhone and the OS for the iPhone, these things can play together in a way that almost nothing else can. Google theoretically can do this, but the Android team and the chipset team and the Pixel team are far enough away from each other that they really effectively can't. I also feel saying, fuck carrier locking. Who do you think killed carrier locking? Why do you think you can buy a phone and choose the carrier after? Do you think the phone carriers were the ones who did that? Do you think Samsung's the one who did that? Do you think Samsung didn't love making custom phones for every carrier and charging them a bunch of money to license them and put their logo on it? Do you remember the Samsung Fascinate versus the Captivate, where they were all the exact same phone minus one modem in them? Those companies loved that because they could charge all sorts of fees to different carriers and then bundle different slop on the phones. The one on Verizon would come with the Blockbuster video app. The one on T-Mobile would come with the Walmart app. All of these things were opportunities for Samsung to make money on the margins because that's where they made their money from. That's just how Samsung made money. They barely made anything selling you the phone, but they made a lot off those crazy deals. Apple was the one who fought here. The reason Apple fought here is they wanted to solve their manufacturing problem where they had to make enough phones to satiate demand, but not make too many Verizon phones when they actually needed AT&T phones. Not make too many 64 gig phones when they actually needed the 16 gig. Not make too many black phones when they needed the white ones. Apple's supply chain stuff was crazy. It's actually one of the biggest things Tim Cook did. He is a supply chain just obsessive expert. He's the reason we went from one iPhone SKU, where we had one iPhone with one size and one color for one carrier, and instead we got 4 different colors, 2 different sizes, 2 different SKUs between Pro and non-Pro, and a bunch of different colors. If you like your iPhone coming in more than one color, you owe Tim Cook a huge thanks, because he figured out how to make the whole manufacturing pipeline operate on demand at a level that allowed them to do that. And one of the biggest wins there was forcing the carriers to allow them to make one phone with all the modems. Because if they didn't do that, Tim refused to put the iPhone on that carrier. He's the one who made Sprint cave. He's the one who made Verizon cave. He certainly made AT&T cave. They were wrapped around Apple for a while. The reason that phones can be used in more than one carrier in the US and now in the rest of the world is because Apple does not fuck around with SKUs. So if you like buying unlocked phones, I hope you go thank Tim Cook for it, because he's the reason all of that happened. Anyways, Apple has taste, and they will fight for their users in ways nobody will give them credit for. I don't care. That's what I'm here for, to tell you the truth so you can keep denying it. Apple does all of these things for a reason. A lot of it comes down to taste and caring too much, but also comes down to that deep hardware and software integration. These are all things that should position Apple well to make a real impact here. I don't think it's enough anymore, though, because they also need a lot of intelligence, and that requires a lot of data, requires a lot of analytics, requires a lot of things that Apple doesn't normally do. And this is where things start to get scary. This is why the AI/ML team is now being referred to internally as aimless. This is why Siri still sucks. This is why they're partnering with OpenAI. This is why they're considering buying Perplexity. Perplexity does have their own models, but for the most part, they rely on other people's models and integrating them in novel ways. Apple can't really win in the model space. That much is pretty true and pretty obvious. Apple's advantages aren't enough here. They've relied on these things for so long that the deep hardware and software integration would let them trounce their competition by just making something that actually works and is a nice experience. But they're so far behind on the integrations and the quality of that experience that it doesn't seem like an advantage. And everyone else has just moved to doing their compute on the cloud. Apple's history has generally avoided relying on external anything. Your phone is your phone. Once it's set up, it doesn't need internet connection. It doesn't need Apple servers. It's just your phone. Apple doesn't rely on external servers and services to power the experiences on your phone. They don't rely on some weird integration with Google to make sure when you take a photo that the right image comes out on the other side. They don't wait on servers to do those types of things because they like doing everything on device because it feels better, it's faster, and most importantly, it's more private. That's always been how Apple does things. That's no longer benefiting them. But the problem goes a little bit deeper. Part of how Apple structures internally is around opinionated leaders for parts of the product. This is part of that taste thing. Is why they hired somebody like Anand Lashempi to run a bunch of the Apple Silicon division. They want these people with deep understandings and care and a little bit of force behind their words to make these things happen. Apple brought in an expert to lead machine learning and AI strategy at Apple, believe it or not, all the way back in 2018, because they brought him in to fix Siri. He was meant to be the big opinionated person that would take over AI at Apple. He used to lead a bunch of the similar AI engineering stuff at Google, and he was poached to take over at Apple. He has done a terrible job, and he needs to be fucking fired. It's actually embarrassing how bad he has done. Apparently, they're keeping him around because he can somehow pull experienced engineers, which they need a lot of, but he has been pulled off of leading a bunch of things. Siri got moved under Rockwell. If I recall, Rockwell directly reports to Schiller, and Phil is going to slowly take over. I really expect him to be the new CEO at Apple within the next 5 years. It's time for Tim to retire. I love Tim. He's done an incredible job, but he needs to retire and run for president or something. At this point, he's done with Apple. The core point I'm trying to make by pulling up all these names is something that's really different about Apple versus other companies. At a place like Google, the name that you know associated with something like Gemini isn't some random exec. It's somebody like Logan. Logan is a head of product for AI Studio, but he's not an exec. He's not some higher up. I am following him back. Twitter is just a shitty, buggy platform. Logan is a front-facing person that talks with the community and is involved in the space, but he is just one piece of the puzzle. Gemini isn't led by one person. There isn't the one driving force at Google for it. In fact, part of what makes Google's structure so interesting is they have the decision makers, but then they have the visionary, so to speak, the leads that aren't the ones who make the decision, but they're the ones who steer the leaders in the right direction. So at Apple, those are the same person. The person who understands the market and what it wants is also the executive making decisions. At Google, the person who understands what people want and is embedded in the community guides the execs in the right direction. Sometimes the execs drag their feet and are no, that doesn't make sense. And that's how you end up with most of Google's shitty products. But sometimes, especially when they're under fire from the competition, they will listen to these people. This is a big part of why YouTube is successful. Funny enough, this actually fits on the topic of Apple stuff. Rene Ritchie was one of my favorite Apple reporters for a very long time. He ran a medium-sized Apple News channel on YouTube. He started talking with Google and specifically the YouTube team about what it was like to make a living as a medium-sized tech YouTuber. And the more he talked with them, the more useful his insights were to them. Eventually, they realized that those insights would help them drive YouTube better. So they brought on Rene. Rene is now the creator liaison for YouTube, which means it's his job to talk to creators about what it's like being on YouTube and to be part of that community so that he can bring the understanding of what YouTubers need back to YouTube so they can make good decisions. One of the reasons YouTube won is Susan, who tragically passed away last year. She was fucking awesome. I love Susan so much. The reason YouTube won is largely Susan's leadership. She really drove YouTube in the right direction. When she became CEO, she really made it focus on creators again in a way that it hadn't for a long time. And when I was at Twitch, I would stare at and envy. And one of the things she pushed really hard was this idea that if a team didn't know what decision to make or what direction to go in with a product, you should go where Renee would. You shouldn't necessarily bug him all the time and ask him to make all these decisions, but you should either get his vision and talk to him about it, or understand him enough that you can guess what decision he would have made or recommended. You should always go in the direction that Renee would say, because Renee is the one who's going in the directions of what creators want. And even though he was far from CEO, he's still at Google and he's still at YouTube. He isn't the CEO, but he is the person that the CEO listens to make sure they're going in the right direction. This results in a lot more chaos and a lot more thrash in the direction of a company like Google, because the executives can be steered in any direction at any time by a person who can speak in a compelling enough way. At Apple, Renee would have been the one in charge of YouTube if YouTube was an Apple product. And that would have benefited in a lot of ways, but it also would have hurt, especially because Apple doesn't really embed themselves in the community and talk to people every day the same way. When you talk to a Google employee, it's like, oh yeah, you're the fourth one I've heard from this week. When you talk to an Apple employee, it's like, wait, they let you talk? It's a whole different environment. And historically, Apple's focus through their really fixed leadership has let them do things no one else could. But with the speed of iteration we have now, with the quality of technologies we have now, and with the use case driven development that matters now more than ever, Apple's strategy isn't working in this era. Things are moving too fast for Apple to be late the way they are. Things are being defined by users so deeply that Apple's visionary-led strategy doesn't work as well as it used to. Data is so important that Apple's privacy focus is hurting them. All the things that define the Apple we know and love are slowly eroding their ability to perform in this new AI-driven world. It doesn't matter how nice your device is to use if it's using itself. It doesn't matter how beautiful the animations are on your website if you're asking an LLM to summarize it for you. It doesn't matter how nice the iMessage UI is if you're letting people fill it with slop and change the background image and generate these awful Genmojis. Apple's taste, Apple's vision and focus, and Apple's strong visionary-driven leadership just don't fucking matter right now. That's a weird thing to say, but that might change in the future too. Software is getting way buggier, and as there's more and more AI writing worse and worse code, having a polished platform matters more. Apple's focus on building their own solutions instead of integrating with others hurts a lot right now. But maybe in a future where everyone's models are good enough, Apple's focus on simplicity will make it easier for users to make the right decision. Maybe in a future where generating an app to solve your problem matters, Apple's focus on polish and good user experiences might allow them to make the best ever vibe coding app. Who knows? But right now, the way Apple does things and the way they think of themselves kinds of runs against the things that make these AI tools really good. In order to make a great AI, you have to run everything on the server. You have to throw away any care of privacy. You have to be okay with pissing off a lot of creatives, which Apple avoids to the best of their ability. You have to not care about the quality of experience for long enough to do it. In order for OpenAI's models to get as good as they were and for all their tools and things to be as quality and experience as they are, they had to be shit for a while. Apple won't do this. They won't ship something where when you ask it, why is the ocean salty? It says, do you like it? User, yes, I like it. User, do you like the ocean salt? User, yes, I do. It's good to be alive. User, why? It's good to be alive. What is the purpose of life? This is not something Apple would ever have built. And if they did, they would have fired the person who built it and shuttered it and pretended it never happened. Apple doesn't do things in a way where they will take these incremental steps to get to the right solution. They're an all or nothing company. The idea of shipping a product that can hallucinate is insane to them. The code reds that happen internally when a screenshot of asking Siri, what day is it, and it gets it wrong, Apple doesn't handle those things. They don't like taking those types of risks. You can say that it's because they're cowards, but it's also because of their deep care of a polished, trustworthy user experience. They want a user to know if they did something on their device, they can do the same thing tomorrow and get the right answer again. And Apple doesn't like non-deterministic anything. And AI kind of runs against the way Apple likes to operate and do things on that fundamental level. Polish and artificial intelligence are opposite ends of a spectrum. It's just a fundamental different way of operating, and the gap there is very, very real. And that's the real problem of what's going on at Apple. It's not like any one bad decision was made or some strategic failure or they made a bad bet. It's that the way Apple's architected, the fundamental things that make Apple what Apple is, run against what make AI good. And I don't know how fixing that looks. I don't even know if fixing that is the right move. It might be better for them to keep waiting, be even more late, and then come back with a better integrated solution that doesn't even feel like AI anymore. It's just your phone being nicer to use. It's impossible to know what is next and who will win long term, but I know for a fact we are not going to see some crazy revolutionary Gemini equivalent come out of Apple because they are not structured in a way where that can happen. They are structured in a way where visionaries drive revolutionary changes, but there's a revolution every couple months now. Apple was not structured for that. Apple was built to drive, not to play catch up. And in a world where everyone's trying to catch up with each other, Apple just looks like they are very far behind. I think I've said everything I have to here. As you can tell, I have a lot of opinions, and I'm sure this comment section is going to be a wonderful scroll. Let me know what you guys think. And until next time, peace, nerds.